Good afternoon. My goodness, wouldn't Ed be so pleased to see this many members of the State College business community following his lead in playing hooky on a workday. If only you had all brought your dogs. On behalf of my mother, Charlene, the rest of the family, Tito, Loca, Remy, and 37 Alpaca up on Bailey Lane, I wanted to welcome you to celebrate the life of Ed Friedman, one of a kind. Thank you for being here. We know it continues to be a very challenging time for public gatherings, and I know it warms my mom's heart to see so many friends and loved ones here. But the operative word today is to celebrate, because we all know that Ed was not a very big fan of maudlin things. It's not to say that he didn't have a big and full heart. He just preferred joking, laughing, and enjoying himself. So today, we'll primarily take that tone, because if we don't, I think every single one of us could imagine Ed seated next to them in the theater here today going, psst, psst, boring. You may have known him by Ed, or Eddie, or Ed Weirdo, or Edsky, or Edward Arthur, or Uncle Ed. Very rarely Mr. Friedman. But I think that almost everyone that crossed paths with him did get some sense of knowing him and really enjoying him. And what better legacy is there than that? Of course, he's well known for creating his own language of sayings and expressions, coined the Eddieisms, which of course meant that you're in on the joke, you're part of his life. We'll hear a lot of those today, I'm sure. We'll hear first from a few of Ed's close friends here on stage, and then of course you're all invited to come next door for a very casual, informal reception at Hotel State College, where hopefully many more laughs will be shared and many more stories told. Before we start, I want to say thank you to Roy Love and the entire staff here at the State Theater for helping to plan and organize today's event. They have been incredible. To my mom, giving her so much comfort, and truly this day would not be possible without them. You'll hear Roy speak about tomorrow's auction of Ed's office items, as it has been meticulously recreated, his office here on the stage, which is amazing, which was a great idea by my mother in thinking, what would she do with all of those things that Ed had personally curated, eclectically picked out, right? Which leads us to our first story of the day. True, factual story. I need to share a note that came from Bob Reddick, of course, one of Ed's oldest and best friends who could not be here with us today, but a friend for 59 years. Bob says that in fact, he was with Ed the very night he was inspired to become an antique collector. He and Ed were living together as roommates in San Francisco. In Bob's exact words now, we had just finished dinner in Chinatown. We both enjoyed this particular restaurant because the owner of the restaurant loved to yell at his customers long before Seinfeld and the Soup Nazi. We thought having dinner at his place was the quintessential San Francisco experience. After our dinner, our group decided to walk around Chinatown. Ed suddenly broke off from the group and wandered into a Chinese apothecary. All of us followed him for this whimsical stop. Within a short time, Ed found the perfect items. He proudly marched to the counter and made his purchase of 2 rectal dilators. What is a rectal dilator, you might ask? Well, this is a very important medical device used to open and relax the sphincter to facilitate inspection or relieve constipation, of course. They were your basic black, and in Ed's words, went with everything. These marvels of medical science were a source of joy and wonder to Ed. We left the shop and I said, "What the hell did you buy those for?" His reply, and I do remember exactly what he said. "Bob, I've decided to become an antique collector. And when you begin a collection, you start with the really important pieces first." He was so happy with these conversation starters that each day he would surprise me by moving them from one room to another in our apartment. First in the living room, next day in the kitchen, one day in the pantry, finally Ed's bedroom, and to my chagrin, my bedroom. It was an early version of Where's Waldo, only without Waldo, just two rectal dilators and a lot of laughs. That is the Ed Friedman that I choose to remember. We'll see who dares to bid against me tomorrow for those pieces in the auction. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Roy Love, founding board member of the State Theater.
Welcome, everyone, to the celebration of the life of Ed Friedman. I'm Dr. Roy Love, past president of the State Theater, original board member of the State Theater, chief cheerleader for the State Theater, and one of the first folks Mike and Wanda Negra recruited to help open the theater in 1999, I think. The State Theater is honored to host the memorial celebration of Ed Friedman and sincerely thank the Friedman family, Sid and Helen, Ron and Susan, Charlene and Ed, and all your children for all that you've done for the State Theater over 20 plus years. At the very beginning of the dream, which was to become the State Theater, Sid and Helen Friedman gave this facility to the community to be a nonprofit. I can remember on opening night helping Mrs. Friedman down the alley just a block away, extending my arm like I used to for my grandmother. It was indeed a great honor. The grand opening of this theater was wonderful. It was attended by our governor, the president of Penn State, many dignitaries, and most of the folks that are here. Our honorary chairman, Mike Reed, who many of you probably don't know, is Bruce Lingenfelter's claim to fame cousin, performed. From the opening night to this day, the Friedman family has supported this theater, saved the theater, stewarded the theater, and when needed, kept our creditors at bay, and that was more than once. Perhaps some of you don't understand what this wonderful gift from the Friedman family means to Centre County, but the CBICC does. By having a gathering space like the State Theater, we keep young entrepreneurs or companies here and grow our economy. The DID, the local restaurants and businesses do. The dance groups, parents of those performers, local musicians, local nonprofits who all raise funds here in this theater. Anyone who sees a performance, a movie, a comedian, knows the value of the State Theater. The president of the board of the State Theater, all the past board members, past executive directors, and employees of the State Theater are thankful to the Friedman family and proud to host this memorial celebration. This theater has faced many challenges and quietly, strongly, always supporting the theater were Ed and Charlene. At a critical point in the evolution of the State Theater, Ed clearly discussed with a major creditor to the theater to stand in line, since the Friedman family was the first in line to be owed, so back off and be patient. We would not be here today without that kind of leadership. The State Theater is proud to recognize, memorialize, and celebrate Ed Friedman. In this theater, his family helped to create. Now a little history on Ed. Ed grew up in State College and attended State College area high school, graduating in 1966. He graduated from Ohio State University, San Francisco University School of Law. Wow. Ed graduated high school in 1966, then a Buckeye, then perused on Haight-Ashbury. That better explains a few things about Ed. You know, Charlene, he's pretty complicated. He also had an MBA from the University of San Francisco and a master's degree from Penn State in hotel and restaurant management. In addition to being a member of the Pennsylvania and Centre County Bar Associations, he was owner of a number of successful business enterprises in and around State College, including industrial commercial realty, hotel asset management company, and numerous real estate partnerships. During his life, he showed a deep commitment to Center County community and served on many nonprofits, boards, and agencies, including many terms on the Center County Assessment Appeals Board. He and Charlene contributed to many charities that provided services to the community at large and were named the Renaissance Persons of the Year in 2012 for their longtime commitment to the betterment of town and gown relationships. Ed was a man of many and varied talents and interests. He loved fly fishing, he loved wine, and he loved to charm his children with magic tricks. He even raised and trained 2 hawks for falconry hunts. Ed and Charlene started and jointly owned Mountain Edge Alpacas in Harris Township. He loved to play tennis and teach students. Ed was a member of the congregation Brit Shalom, where he served in several leadership capacities over the years. On a personal note, I came to town in 1978 as a student and returned in 1986 as a young, naive chiropractor. I never ran into Ed Friedman, ever, whether it was upstairs at the Allen Street Grill or the corner room or walking through town, that he didn't look at me and say, "How are you doing? How's everything going in your life? And how's that young family of yours?" And you know, Ed meant it. He cared. If I saw him at a social gathering, he meant it. And he took the time, and I always considered him a friend, even though we didn't cross paths that often. I was just a young chiropractor, and he was an established owner of so many things in town. But what always struck me about Ed, as an Irishman, he had that sparkle in his eye, that next funny line in his mind, ready to pop out and remind you that life was to be fun. We were meant to achieve great things, but we were meant to enjoy each other's company along the way. So I could always recognize that little glimpse of a leprechaun in Ed, a Jewish one at that. So today, we're going to celebrate the life of Ed Friedman, which we all wish we could have more of. When Charlene told me she decided they were going to donate Ed's office possessions to the State Theater, I was overwhelmed, but not surprised. Ed loved the State Theater. So Charlene decided that we were going to move Ed's office content over to this stage, thanks to Ron Gilligan's crew, and set up Ed's office as it was, and have one last celebration meeting in Ed's office before all of Ed's treasured possessions are auctioned off tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you want to have a piece of the history of State College, it's here. Or historical PA. Or perhaps you were a renter from Ed, and you just want a piece of Ed, whether good or bad. Come by tomorrow and bid high, knowing you're making a gift to help preserve the State Theater, a place Ed loved. And all during this process, I can see Ed smirking down at us today, tomorrow, and singing a bit off key to all of us, but mainly to his beloved Charlene. Don't know much, but I know I love you. And that may be all I need to know. Then rolling into a brass-filled rendition of All You Need Is Love. Hoping all the time that we understand and we get what he's saying. And all the while, Ed will be quietly proud of how he helped State College and touched so many lives over all these years. So now, it's time to call the memorial celebration meeting for Ed Friedman to order. We've assembled a committee of usual and unusual suspects that Ed might have been in a meeting with or a golf cart, but today we're not going to be talking about saving the State Theater or keeping creditors at bay or making a deal between partners or banks or should we build another building in State College. This meeting is about people sharing their love for Ed Friedman. So let's bring the friends into the meeting. Our first, Mike Keebaugh. Come on out, Mike. Mike is a friend since the late 1970s, fellow fly fisherman, author, and former chairman of Raytheon. Mike is a passionate fly fisherman, and Ed and Mike bonded over how to tie up an attractive nymph. Mike Negra. Come on out, Mike. Friend and fellow onophile. Don't worry, that just means they like wine. Founder with his wife Wanda of the State Theater, executive director of the State Theater, past owner of Mike's Video and Appliance, left-handed golfer, an integral part of the State Theater gift. In retirement, Mike has taken on his dream job as a PLCB member. Mark Morath. Come on out, Mark. Friend, business partner, Ed's best hire. Charlene, didn't Ed hire you? You're the one that told me that. And a fellow golden retriever lover. And William Hayes, chairman and CEO of Kish Bank, friend, fellow golfer, colleague of Ed's for the board of Kish Bank. Bill realized Ed had talents far greater than his sense of humor. He quickly scooped up Ed to be an advisor on his board before word got out that he had resigned from a competitor's bank. Bill also spotted that Ed was a fellow Cabernet lover, was a ringer at wine and dine, and loved to clear tables after dinner. Connie kind of liked that too. Don Wagner, come on out. Don is a longtime friend, golf trip buddy, retired Park Forest Elementary School math teacher, local and national athletic prognosticator, and the Swami. And Rabbi David Ostrich. Congregation Brit Shalom. He officiated at Ed's burial service, and keep this secret, but he's a secret member of the Jewish Leprechaun Club. Okay, so let's get this gathering of friends who love Ed Friedman to order. Let's celebrate Ed, have a little fun, and maybe even laugh in the face of our grief as Ed would want us to do. So may we have our first friend come forward to the microphone. Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Roy. Good afternoon, everyone. When Charlene asked me to be a part of this celebration of life for Ed, I was honored. Ed Friedman was a friend. I think that everything I'll say here today will lead you to one conclusion. We are all better people today because we knew Ed. But talking about Ed isn't an easy task because he was so multifaceted and accomplished. He was a modern-day Renaissance man. He had many talents and areas of knowledge. Among his accomplishments, he was first a businessman with a number of successful enterprises, primarily in the central Pennsylvania region. Ed was an entrepreneur. He promoted local development and he created job opportunities in the region. Ed was a partner, and he used these partnerships to enable development of larger projects. Ed was a lawyer. Okay, maybe this isn't the best example. Ed was a student. He had 4 degrees. He was also a teacher. He taught real estate at Penn State and the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors GRI courses. Ed's teaching style was relaxed. For example, he would tell the GRI students they had permission to call him Cupcake. Now, in today's environment where freshmen and sophomore are verboten, cupcake would probably be frowned upon. Ed was a jokester. He once broke into Bruce Heim's GRI course on real estate tax and passed out packets of no-dos to all the students. Ed was a husband of 32 years. He was a philanthropist who supported the community both financially and by serving on multiple boards. Ed was a rancher, okay, a pseudo drugstore cowboy type of rancher, but he owned Mountain Edge alpacas with Charlene. Ed even bought a huge Chevrolet Silverado pick-em-up and trailer to complete the image. But most importantly, Ed was a friend. Anything that Ed did, he did with passion. Ed's credo was, don't do anything half-assed. Always go after a goal with your full ass. Now let me give you a few examples. Ed loved Kentucky Fried Chicken. So he decided he needed an authentic cooker. And he talked his friend Ken Kekolan, who owned the local KFC franchise, into getting him a fryer. And Ed experimented with multiple recipes until what he believed to be a match with the KFC. Then when Ed got a craving for KFC, he rolled out the cooker and began flouring everything in sight with his perfect batter. Now from down in the valley, this looked like an early snowstorm up on the mountain. Of course, Ed didn't cook just a few pieces. He made about 50 at a time. You know, after all, a guy has to eat lunches during the week. A second example of his passion was his foray into aging beef. As a restaurateur, Ed knew that the top steakhouses aged their own beef, and he concluded that the tastiest, top quality beef could be aged at home. In typical Ed fashion, he set up a meat aging plant in a refrigerator in his barn and waited for the mold to form. You could say this experiment was a fungal success. And everybody's familiar with Ed and Charlene's Mountain Edge Alpacas Ranch. In typical Ed fashion, this required remodeling the dairy barn and building a second barn to house the animals, purchasing a new Chevy van to transport the animals, buying an RV to travel to shows. Now this is in addition to the Silverado and trailer I mentioned earlier. I don't even want to think about the inside of the van after hauling these animals all over the East Coast. It probably required more than hanging a couple of air fresheners from the rearview mirror. Ed was also an astute investor, a passionate astute investor. And he decided that an alternative investment to gain higher returns on his money was in classic and antique cars. And he began buying beautifully restored automobiles. Where does one put these valuable assets? Well, Ed ended up building a third barn to house the collection. I guess this kind of shrinks the return on investment, doesn't it? Ed was fun to be around because he made you laugh. He made you think. He had a quick wit and an inner confidence. But all of us have some quirks, and Ed was no exception. He refused to fly commercially. He played golf with pink golf balls. He said this put him in touch with his feminine side. Ed religiously practiced the new diet of the month every month. He paid off his bets in $2 bills. And he loved to give you the limp handshake to get your reaction. Going out to dinner with Ed and Charlene was a treat. He incessantly asked the server, "Do you work here?" And he informed him, "You know, I don't believe in gratuities." And then he tipped the waiter excessively. Ed loved his dogs, and he enjoyed being surrounded by a number of them. Unfortunately, Ed was the world's worst dog trainer, teaching them to jump up on his lap to say hi and generally behave out of control. He and Charlene enjoyed fly fishing, and the three of us shared this pastime. Ed had a lifetime partner in Charlene, or Carlene as he called her often. and the two of them complimented each other. And for your information, Carlene got her name when she first called Ed's law office. The secretary who answered the phone told Ed that a Carlene Stewart was on the line. Ed never forgot. When I started, I said, the one thing I want you to remember is that we're all better people today because we knew Ed. Wherever he went and whatever he did, he improved the situation. He was successful, he was fun, he was passionate, he was caring. We're all better people today because we knew Ed Friedman. He enriched our lives, and he was a friend. Okay, Swami, the over-under on my remarks was 5 minutes. And the early betting was heavily on over. You correctly recommended under, so it's a good call. Thank you. Now let me invite Mike Negrer to the podium. Thank you.
You know, when Charlene asked me to come here and do this, I said, I'll do it, but I don't want to follow Swami. I'm not so sure I want to follow Mike. That was great. And he touched upon so many different things about Ed that we all, knew and loved. And I'm very honored and very blessed to have Eddie as a friend, and I'm honored to be here. And thank you, Ty and Charlene, for giving me the opportunity. And Mike did mention a $2 bill. I got a couple of them here. I mean, I can't see them in the audience, but how many of you carry a $2 bill? I got a couple of them from Eddie from back in the day when we played golf, and I used to carry them as a good luck charm. Now I carry them as a remembrance, and I always will. So anyway, so I'm honored to be here, especially in this theater. And I know that Roy, I couldn't hear what you were saying over there, but Eddie was very involved in this theater from the get-go. And in 1999, when Wanda and I started thinking about this theater, and we got the impetus to do it by going down to York and seeing a show down there, we came back, and the first person I called was Ed. And we got Ed and Charlene to come over to the house, and we started talking about the theater, and I went down to the wine cellar, and Eddie and I shared a real passion for wine. And so I brought back up a Magnum of Silver Oak. And by the time the evening was over, Ed was very enthusiastic about the theater. And I used to, so after that, we used to, I'd go up to Sid's office all the time with Bruce Lingenfelder. And then I'd leave Sid's office and I'd come down to Ed's office, and it looked exactly like this. Can't tell you how many times I did it. But this theater would not have been a reality without Eddie mentoring me and the board and giving me advice about what to do from a donor standpoint and even a construction standpoint. And for that, invaluable, and this I'm sure will be part of his legacy in the region for sure. So I just want to tell a couple stories about Eddie. So I'm definitely on the under is good for me. But Eddie and I also shared a passion for dogs. And we had an Australian Shepherd named Kiwi. And Ed and Charlene had a little one-year-old, not little one-year-old, but a big one-year-old Aussie Shepherd named Tui. And so we thought, oh, it'd be perfect. Kiwi would have been a great mom. And so we said, well, we're gonna mate him. And Kiwi was in heat, and so we went up to Ed and Charlene's house, and we put him in the yard together and broke out some Australian Shiraz, of course, and we let him go. And Kiwi was teaching us all something. But Tui didn't know what to do. And you know how they say about how dogs are a lot like their master, but. I'm not so sure that was right, but Charlene, you can confirm that. So we're all sitting on the patio, and we're sharing our adult beverage, and we watched Kiwi just dance around Tui. And it never worked. We never had pups. But Eddie told me what a great time it was, because it combined three things that Eddie really liked. And that was wine and dogs and sex. So anyway, and finally there was there's one of my favorite memories with Ed, and I have got a couple pictures to share. And that was our trip to Cape Cod. And Mike, you mentioned the fact that Ed didn't like flying commercials. So Jim Burke and his wife at the time, Cassandra, and Ed and Charlene and I got on the plane, and we flew up to Cape Cod. And let's see, I'll point that. So we started with wine, of course, and we had lobsters. And then we went fishing. And then we relaxed. And we had a good conversation. You don't see a body like that very often. And then, as illustrated in this, we got silly. And you know, it's a hallmark of most of my memories of Ed, and I bet you a lot of yours. So I'll miss him. Thanks for letting me share.
Well, good afternoon. It's an honor to be here, spend a few minutes speaking about Brad Pitt. Oh, no, it's not exactly right. But Ed always said everyone confused him terribly with Brad Pitt. Seems to me he said spitting image. No, I'm here to talk about Ed Friedman. Of course, that might be a little wrong, too. If you ever received a call from Ed, you'd say hello. Then you'd hear, Edward A. Friedman, attorney at law. Quiet, nothing thereafter. It's just waiting for a reaction. And it continued, especially on the telephone. If you received a voicemail from Ed, it was only one word, Friedman. And it was that quick. And you'd, okay, you know, do you call back? Do you wait for him to call you again? What are you going to do? We figured it out. Well, I met and knew Ed because of the hotel business. It was in the late 80s. The old Sheridan on Pew Street needed a general manager, and this innkeeper wanted to get back to Pennsylvania. We met, and we seemed to agree on management philosophies and got started. It didn't take long to discover more about him. I found out that his service to others was a standard in his life, which worked out very well in the hotel industry. It's sort of what we're supposed to be doing. Some time passes, and then with some great partners, we built the Motel 6 on North Atherton. You'd know it today as the Quality Inn. Might make a little shout out to one of those original partners, Laddie Thomas, who we lost just this past week, I think. So when it opened in the summer of '99, it's a new business, it's hectic, it's busy, nicely busy, and always exciting. Interestingly enough, the front desk clerks were there, and they were quite surprised when this new desk clerk walked behind the front desk and said, "I need a name tag." And he started welcoming the arriving guests. Yes, it was Ed. That name tag was hurriedly made, and needless to say, the guests loved him. The clerks, they survived quite well with some smiles, but it was nerve-wracking to say the least. A little side note, not only were those clerks scared to perform their normal duties with Ed there, but he started to touch the computer. See, you know, that's not. So time passes. A few years, Hilton Garden Inn gets built on East College, and we started in our opening day or so. Here he comes once again, unannounced, no warning, and he appears in the lobby this time, standing just outside the front desk. Stood there with that disarming smile of his, and he would approach the guests as they were checking in. "May I help you with your luggage?" The guest would whisper to the front desk, "Does he work here? Is it okay?" "It's fine, go right ahead." So he did, and off he ran. Another side note. The problem he created this time was that he wouldn't accept tips from the guests. One lady complained about the bellman. We had to explain that it was okay, it was just Ed, and that's the way he was. So, moving forward, Ed got into this hotel industry, and I think you heard he went for his master's in hotel management. He did study hard, he did go to classes, but he also wanted and needed practical experience. Well, though that guest service stuff that he did at the other hotels was fun, he did take this very seriously. He scheduled himself and then worked every position in the hotel. And that was the days in Penn State up here. He learned and performed quite well, and he actually was a very hard worker. What he started to recognize is how hard the employees worked right along with him. Of course, still no one let him touch the keys on the computers. His thesis was entitled Bottom Line Management, which had each employee benefiting financially if the hotel made a profit. These employees, who once were teaching him how to properly clean a toilet, were later overjoyed by receiving an extra paycheck because of Ed's work. And needless to say, his employee relations thrived beautifully. My office has always been in part of the Days Inn for these years, since the late 80s there. And our setup, it has always had a very hard-working office assistant at her desk near the front door of our office area. Ed would visit somewhat regularly. Here he'd come, unexpected, always welcome, being greeted by the young lady that was working at that desk. He would start, "Do you work here?" "Yes." "How do you like your job so far?" And not say a word, and waiting for the reactions. Always loved the different reactions he got. And then he'd throw out that smile, and then he'd go, "Is Mr. Maruth here?" He changed my name every time he showed up, I swear. It just always something different. Again, waiting for a reaction. Certainly upon the familiarity of Ed coming into the office in the area in the hotel quite often, people got used to him, and it was more comforting. He would arrive on occasion back in that office, and if you'd imagine for a moment, he'd just stand there with that smile, and he'd just stand there, and the young lady would say, "Well, hi, how are you?" Just do this. And he didn't want to say anything, and you never knew what to do or how to proceed, and then it was an aha moment. he forgot the dog biscuit that he usually carried in his pocket, and he needed a replacement before he really announced himself or being caught, because there was a golden retriever peeking around the corner waiting for him to arrive with that treat. So, as the rest of the world waited, they had to sit, often on the floor. And Ed, and that's Ed and the dog, they'd shake hands. He'd serve the treat gently, was how he always gently. She'd get petted and the like, and then he'd say hello to me. Just always second place, always. By the way, Ed was what encouraged me to have a golden in the office, which we've done for a long time. After all, many people may remember how Chassou was ever present in his office for many, many years. So this reaction thing that he would test and retest as he'd walk around the office area and ask so many people, you know, how they liked working here. Do you work here? And how do you like being married? One more reaction he was going to get. We'll skip the part because we heard it already, and I think we're going to hear it more. Have you ever seen a body like this? Well, believe it or not, there was a mission to most of his visits into the office. It was generally found in the folder that he would always have with him. And usually he was coming in, or many times he was coming in, with an edited document that we were working on, or whatever the case may be. The ladies in the outer office were eager to get their hands on the document because they would try to get it from draft form into final form, because we never knew when he would reappear, either sign it or whatever the case may be. So they'd grab it and they'd start working on it. And in that document, you'll find time and time again, Ed did understand deadlines, but he didn't understand lead times. So you needed to get to him as quickly as you could. So time passes, he and I are talking about whatever we're talking about, and one of the young ladies would come in and say, excuse me, Mr. Friedman, we can't really understand your handwriting here. Could you help us? Sure. And then he would take it. He'd read the sentence before and after for context, make one of those faces, then he'd turn with a smile. I can't read it either. He had no idea what that note was at that particular time, but we finally would decipher these things. All right, let me finish up. One more thing. During COVID, when we had next to no business and very little work for our employees, he truly worried that some of those employees and their families might be suffering. He wanted to know who might be out there in a bad situation. And when it did occur, he'd want their name and address. A supporting check made its way to their home, and of course, no response was ever expected. So, the man, the mentor, the model of Brad Pitt, he is loved and missed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello? This is Ed Friedman. And so began every Kish Bank board and committee meeting that Eddie would join by phone. We would always smile and chuckle, even though we knew it was coming, and Eddie would repeat it every time he was engaging remotely. Now, I start with this little remembrance because all of us are here today to pay tribute to a remarkable man, Edward A. Friedman. And I know that each of you has your Eddieisms and special memories that together could begin to define the essence of this man, except for one important thing already identified. He defied definition, even at the end. Ed would have resisted this tribute today, for he didn't do anything with the goal of drawing attention to himself. There were many things Ed cared about, but self-promotion was never one of them. Think of the many times he made you smile or laugh. Never was it at someone else's expense, but almost always at his own. And we can all hear him. You don't very often see a body like this. Or, oh my, 7 o'clock, that will be past my bedtime. Always self-effacing, enigmatic, succinct. So wasn't it just like Ed to leave us at that moment, almost 1 year ago, when there was very little we could do to mourn his passing together or celebrate his life and his legacy? No fanfare. He just slipped away. Well, my friend, you're not going to get away with it. You left us with a powerful legacy, forged from a lifetime of caring, of business acumen, of humor, of generosity, of compassion, of intellect, and of love. And we are going to honor and celebrate that legacy. And what a better place to do it than in this theater that was always so special to him. Among these wonderful pieces that he collected with such a keen eye and a sense of the rare or unusual, rectal dilators notwithstanding, that he surrounded himself with, and with all of you present here in this town, in the shadow of a great university, this place he loved dearly and around which he built his life. And what an extraordinary legacy he leaves us. How do we begin to quantify it? I admit to beginning my preparation for this celebration with the clear determination to capture the essence of the man, to do it with such clarity that all of you would say, yes, that was Eddie. But as soon as I started, I recognized that I'd significantly underestimated the magnitude of my undertaking. So how do you celebrate the essence of a man who defied definition? Perhaps more simply, I should have asked myself, how do we quantify the ways in which Ed touched each of us and made our lives better? And just as we have heard from those who've already spoken, how different his impact might be for everyone here. So I sharpened my focus considerably, and so that now I will speak to the qualities in Ed that I saw emerge over time as I came to know him. From my first impression to my experiences with him, and hopefully each of you will hear things that resonate with you, that recall your own remembrances. And together we can capture all that Ed left us as his friends, his loved ones, his community, and this region. All better because he was here. When I first met Ed, I wasn't sure how to take him. I recall the first time we shook hands. Of course, me being the bold, assertive guy that I am, I reached out to take his outstretched hand and shake it vigorously, only to be horrified when his fingers crumbled in my hand. It was the worst dead fish handshake I'd ever encountered. And in time, I came to realize that it was Ed's way of saying, I don't take myself too seriously. Let's both remember how important that is. What wonderful qualities, humor, humility, spontaneity, that he used for great effect in breaking down pretenses and barriers. Later, he would attend one of our large cocktail parties. Someone almost spoke to this. The first thing Connie and I knew, he had donned an apron and was butlering hors d'oeuvres. And later in the evening, he was bussing glasses and dishes. While this was another example of the humility with which Ed lived, it was also, I think, the value that he placed on being a servant leader, how he lived his life. I never saw a situation where he let pride stand in the way of something that he felt was worth doing. And then, of course, there was the man of few words. When we discussed business, he would always be succinct. That rate sounds awfully high. To which I would eventually reply, what rate would you like to pay, Ed? But during the negotiation, I would be lucky if Ed spoke 25 words. Generally, I was negotiating with myself. He was an astute businessman and negotiator, but that's no surprise to any of us. Never was it personal, never was it adversarial. That just wasn't Ed's style. Which brings me to the expansion of our relationship when business became true friendship. Before the days of cell phones and call forwarding, I would be sitting at my desk. The phone would ring, I'd pick it up, and Ed would say, "Where are you?" "I'm at my desk, Ed." I had learned from him. Always state the obvious in a deadpan way. And he appreciated it, laughing. He would raise the business question that was on his mind, and he'd always end with a note of humor. "You're working too many hours." "You called me, Ed." "So I did. Go home." Finally, our relationship gained full turn. Ed and Charlene became close friends, and we even played in couples golf tournaments together. Talk about a test. Ed became a member of Gish Bank's board, and he brought with him an extraordinary depth of experience, not just in business, but from his days on Mid-State's board, then Keystone and M&T. But he was a community banker at heart who cared about the economic welfare of the community. So it was at that point that I began to see another dimension in Ed. He engaged more extensively, more vocally, on the matters he cared about and in support of Kish's expansion in Center County, but always displaying his true value structure and caring nature. Yes, there was always a moment when his business insight would lead to a terse comment. That probably won't end well. That's all it took. He had become fully invested in Kish, and we paid close attention, even when his observations were wrapped in humor. What was most insightful about Ed's character was revealed not when we were making loan decisions or business decisions, but when we were charting the future of the company or dealing with issues that related to our long-term business strategies. He loved to think long-term. And it was during the board strategic planning discussions that he demonstrated the extent of his intellect and his capacity to think, especially as it applied to long-term planning. The best example I can give is the moment when he reached into his mental archives somewhere and suggested I find a 1994 Harvard Business Review article on the service profit chain. Sure enough, I found it, read it, circulated it, and it would end up transforming the structure of our business. It won't surprise you that its premise was, take good care of your team, and they will take good care of your customers. You can walk into any Kish office today and ask anyone you encounter, a member of the Kish team, if the service profit chain is at the core of what we do. He had a great business intellect, but most importantly, a great people instinct. Caring was truly Ed's greatest strong suit. But as soon as we talk about caring, his generosity and his community support is only a quick click away. You all know about some of their more visible gifts and associated recognition. Ed and Charlene were recognized as the Renaissance People of the Year in 2012 by Penn State. But there were causes they supported that stayed below the radar screen. And in this regard, I speak as much about Charlene's priorities, quite honestly, as I do Ed's. For together they cared deeply about a number of causes, but in particular about the welfare of children, especially children in need. The Children Advocacy Center at Mount Nittany is just one example. But I recall so well inviting them to join us and a few others for a conversation with Dr. Holmes Morton. Holmes, who I expect is out there somewhere, has dedicated his life to researching and treating genetic diseases of the Amish that unfortunately, because they were misunderstood and often misdiagnosed, took the lives of Amish children at a very young age. Holmes, who had made remarkable progress in researching, identifying, and treating a number of these diseases from his clinic in Lancaster, had the goal of building a clinic for special children in Belleville to treat the members of the Anabaptist churches across central and western Pennsylvania. Following a conversation with Holmes, Ed and Charlene were leaving, and Ed pulled out a business card. And he wrote a very large number across the bottom of it. And he said, "This is my commitment to support the clinic. This is my banker, and he'll make sure you get this commitment." And of course, it wasn't long before he did. Today, the clinic in Belleville is open and actively treating patients who otherwise, with no health insurance, with specialized care needs, are receiving cures to diseases that a generation ago would have killed them. Generous, charitable, caring, capable of making a difference. A powerful combination that has changed lives across central Pennsylvania, and because Ed and Charlene care so much. Of course, the same generous spirit is further evidenced by this wonderful theater that was saved and then resurrected to the Friedman family generosity. An incredible facility that is now a staple of the downtown State College art scene and has helped ensure that this downtown remains a vital destination for the residents of our region. In support of restaurants, and shopping, and commerce, even as the very nature of the downtown is changing, the State Theater serves to help preserve the distinct personality of the downtown. How fitting that Charlene chose this venue for the celebration, and this venue for the sale of his antiques, and the State Theater as the beneficiary. Although he would have balked at the celebration, he would have admired the thrust of its benefit to the theater. Well, I could go on, and as could many of you, we should all hope that the stories of Ed's impact on our lives continue to be shared. But let me share one final observation that relates to a bit of guidance that someone once gave to me. It goes, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Ed made us feel. Most importantly, Ed made us feel good about ourselves. He inspired us. His intellect, his humor, his compassion and caring, his humility, his kindness, his business acumen, his appreciation for people, his generous spirit, all combined in a way to form a legacy that will continue to grow with time. And I know each of you will carry it, sharing as you go, because Ed changed us. He made us better. He made State College a better place because he was here. I have a vision of Ed. He is standing on his porch, looking out across the fields, the neat white fences with the alpacas grazing. His view takes in the valley, the valleys that surround Mount Nittany, and the subtle hues that change throughout the day. And of course, the roads leading into State College, and the town itself with its changing skyline, the Bryce Jordan Center, Beaver Stadium, Old Main, and the mountains and ridges beyond. He remembers his childhood and growing up here. And he recalls the town and the university when they were shadows of what they are today. And he feels the impact of his life. It's then that he experiences pride, knowing that his handprints are everywhere. That this extraordinary community is better because he was there. I'm going to close with two stanzas of a poem that I think may capture how we all feel today. It's called Reluctance by Robert Frost. Out through the fields and the woods, and over the walls I have wended. I've climbed the hills of view, and looked at the world, and descended. I have come by the highway home, and lo, it is ended. Ah, when to the heart of man was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things, to yield with the grace, to reason, and bow and accept the end of a love or a season. Ed, we bow and accept that your time with us is over. But we do not believe that your story and your legacy is final. We will use this day as a springboard to share our stories and allow your influence to grow and spread and inspire us for years to come.
I want to first thank Charlene for inviting me to speak for my dear friend Ed. And thank all my fellow sharers of information about Ed, his lives, his legacy. As I sat back there and listened to these things, so many things that I want to share, you could just hear the things repeated over and over again about this man. He was an incredible man. He was a gentleman, a scholar, and most of all, a friend. I got to know Ed through not business, by golf and enjoying good food. A long time ago, over 20 years ago, 4 gentlemen, John Carter, Tom Schwartz, Ed Friedman, invited me to go along with them on limo trips. And we would go all over Pennsylvania. Had to be within, Ed had a criteria, it had to be like 3.5 hours. It couldn't be any more than that, because he treasured his sleep and getting back. So we figured everything out, and each one of us for almost 20 years would take 1 month. In that one journey, we would find a restaurant first, because the food was more important than the golf, and then find a golf course that was close by and suitable to our interests. And we would take a limo and get a driver, normally it was Chuck, and he would drive us, and these little ventures would last about 15 hours. So I did the math. We'd leave at 9 o'clock Center Hills and we'd get back at around noon. So I did the math and figured out that it was over 1,000 hours that generally we stayed together in the limo or eating at a restaurant or playing golf. And if you don't think in that period of time, in that enclosed area, that you have the opportunity to learn and understand and know somebody, it's amazing. And all the things that we've heard up here about a man like Ed, it's incredible. He was so much more than a businessman, so much more. One of the funny things on our journeys was about our 3rd or 4th trip. We knew that 4 of us were going on a trip, and it was my turn to plan the trip. And Ed said, "Swami, 5 of us are going." I said, "What? 5? How are we going to do that with golf?" He says, "Never mind. 5 of us are going. Just make the reservations, do the planning." I said, Who's coming?" He says, "Biggie." I had no clue who Biggie was. So I called Carter up and Schwartz and I said, "Hey guys, who in the world's Biggie?" I don't know. I said, "Well, he's coming with us, or she, or whatever, is coming on the trip." "Really? Well, who's not?" I said, "Well, we're all going with him, whoever, this, she, whatever." And we were puzzled. So we showed up at Center Hills that day, started getting in the limo, and Biggie was already there. And we found out why he called Biggie. We were just stared in amazement. He said, "This is my sleeping partner." The first thing we thought about was, Charlene, does she know about this? Did she approve this? We were just staring at Biggie. Wow. Well, it turns out that Biggie was his pillow. So he loved this Biggie pillow, and he took it everywhere he went. So I'm sure Charlene got used to sharing Biggie in bed with Ed. One of the other funny stories that we shared with this group was we were at a golf course somewhere, and a young lady, she was a cute little girl, she was having her birthday. Well, Ed and John Carter thought it would be appropriate if I would come down and predict how old she was, because I was the Swami. So they got me, said, "Swami, come over here. This girl's celebrating her birthday. Will you please tell her how old she is?" So, and I've done this many times, and I wasn't too bad at it. So I looked at the young lady, and she was a little weather beaten, she was very attractive and young. So I always have like a little calibration thing that I do. I try to, if I think the girl is 50, I'll go to 47, 46. If she's 30, I'll go to 25, just to keep things, in a good spot. And so and they say, oh, I'm flattered. So anyways, they're there standing like, come on, Swamp, come on, tell her how old she is. And so I'm looking at her and I think, she looks like about 45. So I'm going to go with 40. Okay. I said, oh, Swami, you are 40 years old. And that smile on that young lady turned to the biggest frown you ever want to see. She was only 35. So going from this point on, for the next 5 years, Mr. Friedman would constantly remind me, you ruined her day. And not only her day, it could have been the whole month and maybe her whole life. She'll remember this forever. So to this day, I have never, ever gone that way again to predict anybody's age, especially a woman's age. So I've stayed away from that completely. In conversations with Ed one time in the limo as we were going to one of our golf trips, Ray Grecar's name came up, and we were mystified about how he could disappear. And we were talking about all different kinds of things that could have happened to him, where he could be, and all that. So Ed came up with a conspiracy theory or whatever that he could have been in the witness protection program. And, we kind of pondered that and said, well, yeah, maybe. Who knows? There were drugs involved and stuff, and there might be. How could you relocate Eddie? The situation with Grecar, and Eddie says, well, yeah, I think they really did do that with Grecar. I think he's somewhere else. And I said, well, one thing for sure, Eddie, you could never go into the witness protection program. And he looks at me. I said, I'm serious. He said, why not? I said, come on, Eddie. If I was going to track you down, as we heard up here from our speakers, I said, all I'd have to do, if I thought you were in a certain locality, go in there to the restaurant, and I said, has there anybody been in here asking, do you work here? And I said, I'll nail you right away. Or go into a real estate office and ask them, is there anybody that takes people out and says, better than you thought, huh? Look at this, better than you thought. I said, or when they go into other situations and what you say here, do you work here? And I said, all these things will happen, and I know for sure that you're going to get nailed. And he said, well, I guess you're right. I really believe that Eddie Friedman's happiest moment is when he married Charlene. That was a perfect union. That made Eddie complete. And I think if you look at the legacy of Ed, Charlene is right there beside Ed as they just developed everything that they did in life. All the fun they had with the falconry and all the cooking and all the things they did out there at the farm. And when his soulmate, Charlene, would want to do something, they would bond together and do it. And what a wonderful thing. Besides being such an incredible businessman, as we all know, he was a very caring man. Just a sidebar story. I ran into Jeb Boyle, the PGA pro, for many years at Center Hills, and Jeb said, I want to share a story with you, Swami. I said, what's that? He said, when my father passed away, he said, Ed wrote me the most wonderful letter. And that was just one of a zillion examples of how passionate and caring Ed Friedman was. As the speakers were speaking up here, I thought, I wonder what Eddie would think by just looking down upon this group. What would he think? And several thoughts came to my mind. First of all, he would have a big smile on his face, because all of you, his friends, are here in one group and that would make him very happy. Also very proud of Charlene, who organized and put this into motion to happen here today. He would be extremely happy. Now, what would Eddie's message be to us? That's something I think I've thought about a long time. And I think all of our people that have spoken, all our guests have touched on it. It's love, caring. Never take for granted the ones who you love and are closest to you. Never. Never have an argument or a disagreement with a loved one or family member that you don't resolve in a very short period of time. And never go to bed sleeping to sleep when you've had an argument with your spouse, because you never know what the morning may bring. I think these are important messages that we can take from this celebration and really continue Ed's legacy. I'm looking here. What did I? Yeah, here we go. Excuse me just a moment here. When you leave today, there is a T-shirt that we have provided for you that I'm going to put on, that I would like to have you wear as often as you can. And this T-shirt symbolizes Ed Friedman. Wear it with pride. I don't care what you do. He wouldn't care what you would do, as he did everything in life, from cleaning toilets to climbing high skyscrapers to doing, dancing with queens. He had the whole continuum. But this T-shirt, wear it with pride. We have provided enough T-shirts for everyone here as you leave, and they're in sizes medium, large, and extra large. And feel free to take one of those T-shirts. And what it has on the bottom of it is, "Where are you?" You know what? We know where Eddie is. He is in our hearts today and every day. So we don't need to ask that question anymore. Where are you? We know. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to David Ostrich and Rabbi David Ostrich. Rabbi?
I thought we could add some spiritual perspective. I'd like to read the 23rd Psalm to you and then talk a little bit about the last line. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now the last line, which in the Hebrew is, Ach tov v'chesed yardifuni kol yemei chayai. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me, but the Hebrew word yardifuni really is better translated as pursue or chase. Surely goodness and mercy will chase me all the days of my life. And one can just imagine us trying to move through life so quickly that, we're moving too fast for the goodness and mercy to catch us. And those who are wise among us, like Ed, were smart enough to slow down and let the goodness and mercy catch him. And if you think about the goodness and mercy that caught him, he allowed to catch them, it involved two different kinds. One would be the enjoyment of life. We have so many stories about Ed enjoying life, and that's a great blessing. And the other, of course, is letting the opportunities to help others catch him. And he saw those opportunities and worked in them in so many ways, from the small to the large, and we are all beneficiaries of his love and largesse. Today happens to be exactly the year anniversary on the Hebrew calendar of Ed's passing, and the day that we would normally say a Kaddish, the memorial prayer, which we will be saying, of course, in synagogue this week. But I wanted to pray that prayer with you today, and it's actually in the little program. The Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish prayer, is a prayer we say in memory of the dead, but it doesn't ever mention anyone who dies. What it does is it prays that God's kingdom will soon prevail. We have this interesting tension in our faith that God, of course, is in charge of everything, but because of free will and other things, God is not in charge of everything. And the goal is that we can do our part to help God's kingdom soon come, where everything will be wonderful and perfect. And so we pray that that will come soon. And the idea is that being that may the contributions of the person whom we are memorializing have made a difference in that long-term project of making the world better. And of course, we thank God for the blessing of Ed's life. So here are the words: Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alamad yivarach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chay decho beit Yisrael, ma'agala v'zman kariv emru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'alam ol alma'ya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'alev v'yithalal shemei dekudesha barichu, Wa'ila min kol birchata v'shirata, tush birchata v'nechemata, damiran be'alama v'emru, amen. Yehi shalom rabba min shamaya v'chayim, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'emru, amen. Ose shalom b'imroma v'yase shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'emru, amen. May the departed whom we now remember, Ed Friedman, live on. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, and may we appreciate him and think of him with fondness and respect for the blessings he enjoyed, for the blessings he bestowed. We can all say amen.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. By the way, that brings me to a Ed story. I remember my son is very non-denominational, having a few philosophical discussions with grandpers about maybe being Jewish. And it was much better for the receiving to have so many nights of Hanukkah. Boy, I do want to echo everyone saying thank you again to our speakers. If the company you keep and the friends that you have define you, I have even more respect for Ed than I did coming into today. What amazing gifts to hear you all speak so passionately about him. Thank you from our family. But we had one speaker that couldn't be with us here today, and that's Joe Kelly, one of Ed's great friends from Vero Beach. He had sort of a second community down there, and he wanted to share one story. He has having hip replacement, so couldn't be with us. But this summed up the Ed Friedman that he knew. So they would often have conversations, many times over a glass of wine, about current events and things in the region. And one of them came to be about the 4 chaplains of World War II. Now, I had never heard about the 4 chaplains, but there were 4 clergymen, 1 Catholic, 1 Protestant, 1 Dutch Reformed, and 1 rabbi, who gave up their life jackets and came together to provide comfort as the U.S. Dorchester was being sunk by German submarine. And one of the survivors, actually, of the U.S. Dorchester came to live in Vero Beach, Florida, and championed, if I could say that, a monument down there. And Ed was so very interested, inspired by this story and by this man that he sought him out, Ernest Heaton, and they actually met with him and visited with him. And he loved this whole idea about how humanity should be a commonality between religions, not something that would divide people. And so as the monument was being commissioned, Ed and Mr. Kelly agreed they should support this and make a donation for $1,000 apiece. Well, time goes by, and like so many things, things happen, and Joe sort of forgot about it until they saw a notice in the paper that there was the unveiling of the Four Chaplains Monument, he said to Ed, I can't believe we forgot it. We forgot to do it. And Ed said only, it's taken care of, which he only later came to find out that was Ed and my mother underwriting the entire thing. And being curious about history, being intellectually curious and inspired by others, and willing to take action without the need for any recognition. That was the Ed Friedman that Joe Kelly remembers. So wow, for me, a lot of pressure up here. Knowing Ed and Mom, financed my Penn State education, which was actually with a major in speech communications. And I remember Ed saying, speech communications, what the hell are you going to do with that? And I obviously still have no idea because I'm not even going to be able to follow my own instructions about keeping things light. And thankfully, with all of these gentlemen up here also, I had no idea how to organize a speech and put into words, Ed Friedman. And speaking of no idea, I have no idea how it comes to pass that I am nearly 50 years old now, as I still vividly remember Ed coming into my life when I was 10 or 11 years old. And he was much younger and actually, better looking than I am now. So, Ed was, as a stepfather, so he was never one to force things. He was never one to preach parental advice or really try to be that father that I know that he saw that I needed. He just sort of let things happen quite naturally. But I learned so many important lessons about becoming a man, from him. And not just to buy my wife David Yurman jewelry every single holiday season, which is yearning, because she's yearning for more David Yurman. But I actually have done that, which my wife can confirm. It's funny, we talked about the common messages, just so powerful. When I think about what I've tried to learn from Ed, it is that word humility, because we kept hearing about it today. Every single conversation that you always had with Ed was about you. Where'd you go and what'd you have for a snack? How do you like being married so far? Was she nice looking? See any hot chicks? And 30 plus years, I don't think I ever truly heard him talk about himself. Certainly not his accomplishments in business. Now, some might say that was because he was letting Mom do all the work, but we all know that's not true. This was not a man that was worried at all about impressing people. Yes, he had the car collection. Well, this was not Ferraris, it's Good Humor ice cream trucks. I don't think he ever had one designer piece of clothing. It was multi-pack, tighty-whitey, brief underwear. Gadgets and golf clubs, sure. He was very content with himself to sit in his easy chair, read a broadsheet newspaper, pet his beloved dogs, have a quiet dinner with family or a boisterous one with friends. His greatest joy and satisfaction was in seeing others around him happy. I've tried. It's very, very difficult to achieve, but I've tried to emulate that. I said at the funeral, the greatest gift and the greatest thing that I could say about Ed was that for all the time he was alive, I never once worried about my mother's well-being. And knowing what a tough year that it's been for her, with health issues and business complications and everything life throws at you, man, I do wish he was still here to look out for her. And that she was there to look out for him. Because those 30 plus years, in my observation, were the best of her life. He really encouraged her to pursue whatever her passion was, whether that be travel, yoga, alpaca judging. He showed interest and he showed support. He was even a little bit of a romantic, which is funny, because I still remember him placing Playboy centerfolds into the refrigerator so they would fall out, and he would say, see? But they did have their own great romance, which you could see every time that they would have occasion to dance together. There's a lot of great pictures there. I saw mutual respect, and that's a very powerful thing for a son to witness. Other random things that I observed from Ed: the value of traditions. Man, he liked his traditions. He liked to go to Maine each fall, visit the same place for a lobster roll. He liked to talk to Bob Reddick after every Penn State football game and talk about how bad the offense is. He liked to have Christmas Eve at Duffy's Tavern, where he and his brother would recite lines from the original Christmas Carol. If you're following traditions, it means you're keeping those that matter to you very close. I like to make laughter a priority. I think for him, that's the greatest currency of all. I rarely think any of us saw him in a bad mood, or at least he didn't show it. I sense that for all of the things that he accumulated, he didn't really value stuff. He cared about laughter, making you laugh, and we all know he tried so hard at it. Like my son's birthday, when his favorite character was Curious George, and he dressed up in a full skin-tight outfit as the man in the yellow hat. Not the tall, slender man in the yellow hat, but the short, more rotund version. I'm also emulating that. And to mean what you say, Ed was not much of a salesman. There didn't seem to be much manipulation in the way he approached life or his words, which is meant when he said something, it was truthful, you knew he meant it. Like the time I saw him hold my son on his lap and say, "I love you," words that rarely came out of his mouth before, and knew that he meant it. Because of course most people know that when my mom first told Ed that she loved him, his response was ditto. And then for many years after that, it was, "Well, doll, I think you're swell." So I think I speak for everybody here when I say, man, we really, really miss you, Ed, and we think you're swell. So Salem, if you could come to the microphone here. My sister, Salem Bartlett.
Who was it that said they didn't want to follow the first speaker? Definitely don't want to follow Ty Stewart. So bear with me. Before I start on my prepared statements, I do want to thank all of you for sharing what you shared. Recently, Ed said to me, "If you don't have friends and you don't have rewarding work, what do you have?" And the fact that you all made that a priority today and came and spoke of who he was to you as a friend. Hopefully he would be sitting here giggling with those stories the way that he did, when his whole fantastic body would jiggle, and he would, really miss that. So what do you say about this amazing man that hasn't already been said or shared? It's a tough question. Considering one of the largest lessons that he taught me personally was that words matter only if you back them up with your actions. It's been a great privilege to bear witness to the chapters of Ed's life that I was able to, and it's still inconceivable to me that he's no longer in it. Eddie, Edward A., Uncle Ed, Grampers. For me, he was Edsky. And to him, I was Mellis, which is, of course, my name backwards. The name was important because it came from a comic that I had written, actually in the 6th grade, probably for Swami here, because he was my teacher at Radio Park. And I was quite embarrassed to show it to other people, but secretly proud of it. Ed was dating my mother at the time and didn't really quite know what to make of him, but he started calling me Mellis. And I realized that in giving me the name, this nickname, he was using his wit in communicating to me that he saw me and he respected me and that he was recognizing and valuing my creativity. Considering it was a time that I had very little self-esteem on my own, that meant so much. The reason I call him Edsky was what he asked me to call him when he married my mother. Didn't expect me to call him Dad, just call me Edsky, even though he would introduce me to everyone as his daughter and my brother as his son. Edsky and Mumsky. She had to have a name that matched his. They turned into Grammar and Grampers, and it was grammar with a W, by the way. These nicknames were just the first of many lessons that he taught me. Don't take yourself too seriously. Honor and respect your family, and particularly your mother. If I didn't, he would come find me, and those weren't always funny conversations. Mostly be approachable, be open, be fascinated by other people. Indeed, it was the hardest times of life that he taught me the most. In college, I rented an apartment from Ed over on Foster, and my brother, coming over to watch my TV since he lived in the dorms at the time, we set the kitchen on fire making popcorn. Imagine telling your landlord that you have created that kind of damage and then your landlord being your stepfather. The very next day, he came and knocked on my front door, and I really, when I opened the door, expected to be in a heck of a lot of well-deserved trouble. He said, "Wait, don't move." Oh boy, I'm really gonna get it now. And he very slowly walked through the courtyard of these apartments and down steps to his car, pulled out a package, walked back up to me, set it at my feet. There, it was a very small microwave and a box of Orville Redenbacher microwave popcorn. As he walked away, he said, "We'll not speak of this again, and please be careful." There are other memories that were not so funny, where he still taught me the importance of family and loving unconditionally. When my mother's father died, my maternal grandfather, it was an incredibly hard time for our family. They were newly married, and I remember watching him show me what it is to support your loved one as he calmed her so that she was prepared to go into the church, honor her family. He knew her pain, and he just said to her, "Be fair to yourself." In my own life, I could write a book of all the not excellent decisions that I've made. And every time, he would be the one who would give me the advice that I needed, usually unsolicited. Yes, I'd get those calls, "Where are you? This is Ed." But when it was bad, he would just say, "I have something to tell you." And usually, it was just what I needed to hear. When I divorced, he said, "When you're ready, and you care about yourself first, the family that you're searching for will be there." And he was right. When I lost a job that I loved and worked hard at for 18 years, he said, "You're smart. You're a hard worker. There'll be another job, and it will be better. And by the way, they're probably going to end up like Circuit City if they let people like you go anyway." And again, I have reams of examples, but you get the point. One thing that's really stuck with me, and someone else spoke about, I think it was Swami spoke about a letter that he would write. And he wrote beautiful letters, and he wrote very short notes. When my own biological father died, he wrote me a note, and in it just said, "I'm thinking of you. Maybe under different circumstances, your father and I would have been friends. Considering how many times my Edsky was there for me as a dad, it must have been very hard to write those words. And it was generous and kind and compassionate. Edsky was funny. I smile at so many of his phrases, his Edskyisms, if you will. But he could also know and recognize when it was time to be serious. He was a studious person. Everyone here has mentioned that he was a lifelong scholar and reader, but he was also a lifelong scholar of us. He was fascinated by us, and he remembered everything we told him because he truly cared. And for me, he made me better. He took a lost child and gave her legs to stand on. And I'd just like to close with a book that I found in his library as the rain came down today, and I thought how the farm was mourning him in the same way that we do. And I'm breaking Ty's maudlin rule, so I'll just read with his glasses from the end of this book. It's called, by the way, A Modern Gentleman. I'm not sure his glasses are going to work for me. I might have to read it with my own eyes. A gentleman is a gentleman is a gentleman. Being married, involved, single, gay, or naked doesn't dictate one's character or charm. Similarly, the venue or medium of interaction should heighten, not hamper, exchanges. Engaging in keenly naughty behavior is possible in all nearly situations. Wherever you are, make an impact. Don't just take up space. Know how to speak well and when not to spoil a meaningful silence. Cultivate an energy that makes people smile and watch your stock rise. So with that, I'm just going to put on his top hat. And I'm going to say, thank you, Eddie. Thank you for loving me when I didn't love myself. And since I got too maudlin, God bless us, everyone. And with that, I'd like to bring up my nephew and his grandson, Chase Stewart.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chase, and to me, Ed Friedman was Grampus. He was always very kind and very funny. He did magic tricks for me and made funny faces on FaceTime. He even let me borrow his metal detector to try and find buried treasure. He would put me on his lap and say that we were going to do like Grandma and meditate together. But then, he would tickle me. He also taught me about his love and passion. Hot chicks. Now, if I can ask you guys to please find your programs, well, you will see the Ode to Uncle Eddie printed out. It was written by his good friend from Florida, Joe Kelly. We're going to play a video in a second, and Grandma and I thought it'd be a good idea if everybody could read it out loud together, like the Pledge of Allegiance at school. Mr. Kelly starts with the joke first, so wait until the second time he starts. But I will read it once as you find your programs, so everyone knows what it says and can get ready. Then we'll do it all together. There once was a man from State College who astounded us all with his knowledge. A farmer in Bullsburg, a landlord near campus, an attorney too, but not known to practice. He loves Grand Harbor and enjoys time in Maine, not a fan of commercial travel, so he had his own plane. Known for his generosity and charitable ways, he shuns recognition and doesn't seek praise. He's truly successful, we know that for sure. It's obvious to all, he's a mensch we adore. So let's raise our glasses and wish him good cheer. We love you, Uncle Eddie, and that's crystal clear. Okay, can we please roll the video? We'll do it together. Thank you.
And he has worked very long minutes, if not hours, on this. There once was a man from Nantucket. This is not a limerick. This is an ode. You got to hold the microphone. This is an ode. It's an ode to Uncle Eddie. There once was a man from State College who astounded us all with his knowledge. A farmer in Bollesburg, a landlord near campus, an attorney too, but not known to practice. He loves Grand Harbor and enjoys time in Maine. Not a fan of commercial travel, so he has his own plane. Known for his generosity and charitable ways, he shuns recognition and does not seek praise. He's truly successful, we know that for sure. It's obvious to all, he's the mensch we adore. So let's raise our glasses and wish him good cheer. We love you, Uncle Eddie, and that's crystal clear.
So, in conclusion of this wonderful celebration of Ed's life, this is a community arts, performing arts center. And Charlene, you told me once Ed surprised you with a band playing a very special song. So I know Ed would love to play that song for you one more time. So if we can have Tommy and Skip Wareham come out.
Love, love, love. Love, love, love. Love, love, love. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you can sing that can't be sung. Nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. Everybody. Nothing you can do to make a made. Nothing you can save that can't be saved. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be in time. It's easy. Everybody. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can see that isn't shown. Nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Everybody now. All you need is love. Thank you. Everybody. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Love is all you need. Love Love is all you need. Love is all you need. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Love is all you need. Love is all you need.
Thank you so much to Skip and Tommy Wareham. Thank you for that. Thank you to the crew of the State Theater. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for everyone being here. This will conclude this event. Again, there is a casual reception down at Hotel State College, which is the entire building, both upstairs at the Allen Street Grill, downstairs at the corner room. Hope to be able to share, again, more Eddieisms just down the street in a few minutes. Thank you all. Grab a t-shirt.